Musa's finger trembled on the trigger as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the black SUV, 20 meters away. An easy shot. The president's security detail was scanning the crowd, but they trusted Musa. He was one of them. "Now," whispered the voice in his earpiece. "Take the shot now." But Musa hesitated. Through his rifle scope he could see the president's face clearly. Traoré was smiling, waving at the small crowd that had gathered to welcome him back to the compound. He looked tired but happy. "I can't," Musa whispered into his radio. "Your daughter needs that surgery," the voice reminded him coldly. "Your wife is counting on you. Take the shot." Musa's hands were sweating. The money they had promised would change everything for his family. But as he watched President Traoré shake hands with the other guards, he realized he couldn't pull the trigger. "I won't do it," he said firmly. The voice in his earpiece turned harsh. "Then you've just signed your family's death warrant." Before Musa could respond, he heard a different sound. A sharp crack from somewhere behind him. The president stumbled and fell to the ground. Blood spread across his white shirt. "Target down," came a calm voice over the radio. Mission accomplished. Musa stared in horror. Someone else had taken the shot. The president lay motionless on the concrete while his security team rushed to help him, but it was too late. President Traoré was dead. Also, it seemed. As the guards surrounded the fallen president, Musa noticed something strange. There was blood, but not enough, and the president's chest was still moving slightly. "Code red, code red," shouted Captain Sanogo into his radio. "President is down. We need medical immediately." But Captain Sanogo wasn't looking at the president. He was looking directly at Musa, and his expression was cold and knowing. Musa realized with growing terror that he had been set up. The voice in his earpiece, the money, the threats against his family. It had all been a trap. But a trap for what? "Drop your weapon, Sergeant Cone," Captain Sanogo ordered, his gun now pointed at Musa. "I didn't shoot," Musa protested. "I couldn't do it. Someone else." "We know," Captain Sanogo said. "That's exactly what we were counting on." As medical personnel rushed to treat the president, Musa saw President Traoré open his eyes and speak quietly to the doctor. He was alive. The blood was fake. The whole thing had been staged. But if the assassination was fake, then what was really happening? "Sir," one of the guards called to Captain Sanogo, "we've got movement in the East Tower. Sniper position." Captain Sanogo spoke into his radio. "Team 2, secure the East Tower. Our real shooter is up there." Musa's mind raced. If they knew about the real shooter, if they had staged the president's death, then they had known about the plot all along. But why had they let it proceed? "Because we needed to catch all of you," Captain Sanogo said, as if reading his thoughts. "Not just the triggerman, but everyone involved." Through his earpiece, Musa could hear panicked voices. "Something's wrong. The target should be dead. We've been compromised. Abort the mission." "Your friends are realizing their mistake," Captain Sanogo explained. "They hired you as a distraction, never planning for you to actually take the shot. The real assassin was positioned in the tower, but we've been watching both of you for weeks." Musa felt sick. "My family is safe. We moved them to protective custody 3 days ago. The people who threatened them will never get near them again." But as Captain Sanogo spoke, his radio crackled with urgent messages. "Captain, we've got a problem. The tower is empty. No sign of the shooter." Captain Sanogo's confident expression faltered. "What do you mean empty?" "The position was set up, but nobody's here. Just equipment and, sir, you need to see this." The captain pressed his earpiece. "What is it?" "There's a note. It says wrong target, wrong location. The real assassination is happening now." Captain Sanogo's face went white. He grabbed Musa by the arm. "Where is President Traoré supposed to be tonight? His real schedule?" "I don't know. I was only told about this event." "Think. The people who contacted you, did they ever mention other locations, other plans?" Musa tried to remember his conversations with his mysterious contact. There had been something about a backup plan, something about making sure the president couldn't escape even if the first attempt failed. "The hospital," Musa said suddenly. "They mentioned something about the hospital. If the first plan failed, they had people at the hospital." Captain Sonogo's eyes widened with understanding. That's where we're taking him now, the ambulance. He spoke frantically into his radio. All units, stop the ambulance. Do not let it reach the hospital. But the ambulance carrying the wounded president was already disappearing into the night, its sirens wailing as it raced toward what everyone believed was safety. Inside the ambulance, President Traoré was beginning to realize that the two paramedics treating him were not who they claimed to be. President Traoré lay strapped to the gurney inside the speeding ambulance, still wearing the fake blood that had made his staged assassination look real. The plan had been simple: pretend to be shot, identify the real assassin, then reveal the truth once the conspiracy was exposed. But something was wrong. The paramedic leaning over him had cold, unfamiliar eyes. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this before, but not to save lives. "Mr. President," the paramedic said quietly, "I need you to remain very still. This will only take a moment." In his hand was a syringe filled with clear liquid. President Traoré tried to speak, but the fake blood mixture they had used contained a mild sedative to make his unconsciousness look more realistic. His voice came out as barely a whisper. What is that?" "Something to help you sleep," the paramedic replied. "Permanently." The president's mind raced. The staged assassination at the compound had been a trap to catch the conspirators, but somehow they had turned the trap against him. Now he was helpless, strapped down and sedated, with no way to call for help. The second paramedic was driving the ambulance, but he kept glancing back through the partition window. "How much longer?" he asked. "Just finishing up," the first paramedic replied, bringing the syringe closer to the president's IV line. President Traoré summoned all his strength and managed to knock the syringe away with his hand. It clattered to the floor of the ambulance, its contents spilling across the metal surface. "He's more awake than we thought," the paramedic said. "Hold him down." The driver pulled the ambulance to the side of the road, both men now focused on restraining the president, who was fighting despite his weakened condition. But the commotion inside the ambulance was visible to the chase car that had been following them. Captain Sonogo had commandeered a police vehicle and was racing to catch up to the ambulance when he saw it swerve and stop. "Something's happening," he told his driver. "Get us there now." The ambulance back doors burst open, and the two fake paramedics jumped out, abandoning their mission. They had a backup escape plan, but it required them to reach the motorcycle hidden in the nearby alley. Captain Sonogo arrived just as the men were running toward the alley. "Stop, security forces!" One of the men turned and fired a pistol at Captain Sonogo, who dove for cover behind his vehicle. The other man continued running toward the motorcycle. "Are you hit?" his driver asked. "No, but we can't let them escape." Captain Sonogo spoke into his radio. "All units, we have 2 suspects fleeing on foot near the old market. One is armed." Inside the ambulance, President Traoré was trying to free himself from the restraints. The sedative was wearing off, and he could move more freely now, but he was still weak, and he didn't know if there were more assassins waiting. Captain Sonogo approached the ambulance carefully, his weapon drawn. "Mr. President, are you injured?" "I'm alive," came the weak reply, "but they tried to inject me with something." Captain Sonogo climbed into the ambulance and began untying the restraints. As he worked, he spoke into his radio. "We need a real medical team here immediately, and I want every hospital in the city checked for infiltrators." "Captain," the president said as the restraints came loose, "how did they know about our plan? The fake assassination was supposed to be classified." "Someone leaked the information. Someone who knew about the operation from the beginning." The president sat up slowly, his head spinning. "You think there's a mole in your team?" "I'm starting to think there are moles everywhere." Captain Sonogo's radio crackled. "Captain, we've apprehended one of the suspects. The other escaped on a motorcycle, but we have his partner." "Good, bring him to headquarters for questioning." But as they spoke, neither of them noticed the small device attached to the underside of the ambulance, a device that had been transmitting their entire conversation to listeners who were already planning their next move. The man on the motorcycle pulled up to a safe house across the city and immediately made a phone call. "The ambulance plan failed," he reported. "But we got valuable intelligence. They know about the hospital infiltration." "Then we moved to phase 3, came the reply. "The president may have survived tonight, but he won't survive tomorrow." What about our man in custody? He knows nothing that can hurt us. But just in case, make sure he doesn't live to talk. Back at the ambulance, Captain Sanogo was helping President Traoré out of the vehicle when his radio erupted with urgent messages. All units, we have explosions reported at 3 government buildings downtown. Hospital district is under attack. Multiple casualties reported. Captain Sanogo looked at the president with growing alarm. This wasn't just about killing you. It was about creating chaos. The president straightened his shoulders, his strength returning. Then we need to get to the command center. If they want chaos, we'll show them order. But as they prepared to leave, Captain Sanogo couldn't shake the feeling that they were still playing catch-up to an enemy who was always one step ahead. The real question was how many more traps were waiting for them. The first explosion shattered windows 3 blocks away from the presidential compound. Captain Sanogo threw himself over President Traoré as debris rained down around them. Command center, what's the situation? Captain Sanogo shouted into his radio. 3 simultaneous explosions, the central bank, the Supreme Court, and the telecommunications building. We're getting reports of casualties. President Traoré struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. They're trying to paralyze the government. Sir, we need to get you to a secure location immediately. No, the president said firmly. We need to get to the command center. The country needs to see that the government is still functioning. But as they moved toward their vehicle, Captain Sanogo's radio brought more bad news. Captain, the command center has been evacuated. Gas leak reported in the building. Gas leak? Captain Sanogo's eyes narrowed. That's convenient timing. President Traoré was thinking the same thing. They're not just trying to kill me, they're trying to eliminate the entire chain of command. Sir, what about the alternate command post? The one at the military base? Yes, that's our best option. But as they drove through the city streets, they could see that the situation was worse than they had imagined. Crowds were gathering at the sites of the explosions, and some groups were turning violent. Stores were being looted, and cars were being overturned. The people think you're dead, Captain Sanogo observed. The news is reporting that you were killed in the ambulance attack. Then we need to get on television immediately. The telecommunications building was one of the targets. Most of the city's broadcast capabilities are down. President Traoré felt the weight of the situation settling on him. Whoever was behind this had planned everything perfectly. Create confusion about his death, eliminate government command structures, and then let chaos take over. Captain, came a voice over the radio. We've got a problem at the military base. Reports of gunfire inside the perimeter. Captain Sanogo and the president exchanged glances. Their safe haven was under attack too. Where can we go? The president asked. I don't know, sir. It seems like they've anticipated every move. As they drove through the increasingly chaotic streets, Captain Sanogo's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something told him to answer it. Captain Sanogo, he said cautiously. Captain, this is Sergeant Musa. Don't go to the military base. It's a trap. Musa, where are you? How did you get this number? I'm at a safe location with my family, but I've been monitoring the enemy communications. They have people inside the military base waiting for you. Captain Sanogo looked at President Traoré. Should we trust him? The president nodded. He chose not to shoot me when he had the chance. That means something. Musa, where should we go? There's an old radio station on the east side of the city. It's not connected to the main telecommunications grid, so it survived the attack. If you can get there, you can broadcast to the nation. How do we know this isn't another trap? Because I'm going to meet you there. I have information about who's really behind this. Captain Sanogo made a decision. We'll be there in 20 minutes. But as they changed direction toward the east side of the city, neither of them noticed the motorcycle that had been following them since they left the ambulance. The rider spoke into his helmet microphone. They're heading to the radio station. Should we intercept? No, came the reply. Let them go. The radio station will be perfect for what we have planned. The motorcycle fell back, maintaining a safe distance. The trap was being set once again, and this time there would be no escape. At the radio station, Sergeant Musa was setting up equipment with the help of the station's elderly engineer, but Musa wasn't preparing for a broadcast. He was preparing for a battle. Because he knew the truth about what was coming, and he knew that Captain Sanogo and President Traoré were walking into the deadliest trap yet. The question was whether he could warn them in time, or whether his own family would become the next target if he tried to interfere with the plan. As President Traoré and Captain Sanogo approached the radio station, explosions continued to rock the city behind them. The conspiracy was entering its final phase, and everything depended on the next few minutes. But none of them realized that the biggest surprise was still waiting for them inside the radio station. President Traoré and Captain Sanogo arrived at the abandoned radio station to find Sergeant Musa waiting for them with his rifle ready. But he wasn't pointing it at them. "They're already here," Musa said urgently. 3 men positioned around the building. They arrived 10 minutes ago. Captain Sanogo surveyed the area. The old radio station sat on a hill overlooking the city, with several routes of approach, but limited escape options. It was indeed a perfect trap. "Who are they?" President Traoré asked. "Foreign operatives," Musa replied. "The same people who hired me, but I finally learned who they really work for." "Which country?" "Not a country, a corporation. They want to destabilize the government so they can control the mining rights." President Traoré felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. 3 months ago, he had rejected a major mining contract because the terms were too favorable to the foreign company. The decision had cost them billions of dollars. "They're willing to destroy the entire country for money?" he asked. "They're willing to do whatever it takes," Musa confirmed. "And they have people everywhere, government officials, military officers, even some of your own security team." Captain Sanogo's radio crackled. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Ouedraogo. What's your location? We need to provide backup." Captain Sanogo looked at Musa, who shook his head vigorously. "Don't trust him," Musa whispered. "He's one of them." Captain Sanogo made a decision. "Lieutenant, we're secure at an undisclosed location. Maintain your position and await further orders." "Sir, that's not protocol. We need to know your location for security purposes." "I said maintain your position, Lieutenant. That's an order." The radio went silent, but Captain Sanogo knew that Lieutenant Ouedraogo would now be reporting their refusal to cooperate to his real employers. "How many of my people are compromised?" Captain Sanogo asked Musa. "I don't know exactly, but at least 3 that I'm aware of. Maybe more." President Traoré was looking out the window at the city below. Fires were burning in several districts, and he could see military vehicles moving through the streets. But were they responding to the crisis? Or were they part of it? "We need to get a message out," he said. "The people need to know I'm alive." "The radio equipment is still functional," said the station engineer, an old man named Kofi who had been hiding in the basement. "But if you broadcast from here, every hostile force in the city will know exactly where you are." "Then we make the broadcast and leave immediately," Captain Sanogo decided. But as they prepared the equipment, Musa spotted movement outside. "We've got company. At least 6 men approaching from different directions." Captain Sanogo looked through his binoculars. The men were well armed and moving with military precision. This wasn't a random search. They knew exactly where to find their targets. "How did they find us so quickly?" President Traoré asked. Musa checked his equipment and found the answer. "They put a tracking device on me. I thought I had disabled it. But," he held up a small electronic device that was still blinking red. "They've been following us the entire time," Captain Sanogo realized. "This was never about getting you to safety. They wanted to isolate you in a location where they could finish the job." "Then we fight," President Traoré said simply. "Sir, with respect, you're not a soldier." "Tonight I am." Old Kofi emerged from the basement carrying an ancient rifle. "This station has been attacked before during the Civil War. We know how to defend it." Outside, the attackers were taking positions around the building, but they weren't rushing in for an immediate assault. They were setting up for a siege. Musa's radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Sergeant Cone, we know you're in there. Send out the president, and your family will remain safe." "My family is already safe," Musa replied into the radio, "and the president isn't going anywhere." "Then you've made your choice. We'll give you 5 minutes to reconsider before we come in." Captain Sanogo counted their resources: 4 men, limited ammunition, and an old building that wouldn't stop high-powered rounds. The odds were not in their favor. But as he looked at President Traoré, Musa, and old Kofi, he realized something important. They weren't just fighting for their own lives anymore, they were fighting for the truth. "Mr. President," he said, "we have 5 minutes to get your message out before they attack. What do you want to tell the nation?" President Traoré looked at the microphone, then at the men who had risked everything to protect him. "I want to tell them that their government is still fighting, and that we'll never surrender to those who would sell our country to the highest bidder." As he began to speak into the microphone, gunfire erupted outside. The final battle was beginning, and the outcome would determine not just their survival, but the future of the entire nation. But none of them knew that this broadcast was being heard by more than just the people of their country. Someone very powerful was listening, and help was already on the way. President Traoré's voice cut through the static as gunfire echoed outside the radio station. "My fellow citizens, this is your president. I am alive, and I am fighting for our nation's freedom." Bullets shattered the windows around them, as Captain Sanogo and Musa returned fire. Old Kofi worked frantically to keep the broadcast equipment running despite the chaos. "The explosions you witnessed tonight were not random acts of terror," the president continued, ducking as another volley of shots rang out. "They were orchestrated by foreign interests who want to control our natural resources." "Sir," Captain Sanogo shouted over the gunfire, "we need to move to the back room. They're surrounding us." But President Traoré stayed at the microphone. "These criminals have infiltrated our government, our military, and our security forces. They staged my assassination to create chaos and seize power." Outside, the attackers were growing impatient. Their leader spoke into his radio. "The broadcast is going out live. We need to end this now." "Storm the building," came the reply. "Kill everyone inside." Musa saw the assault team preparing to breach the front door. "They're coming in." The first attacker through the door was met by Musa's rifle. The man fell, but 3 more pushed through behind him. Captain Sanogo and Musa fought desperately to hold them back while President Traoré continued his broadcast. "To the people of our nation, do not let fear divide us. Do not let chaos consume us. Stand together, and we will overcome those who seek to destroy our democracy." But the attackers were gaining ground. Captain Sanogo was running low on ammunition, and Musa had been wounded in the shoulder. They were being pushed back toward the broadcast room. "Mr. President," old Kofi called out, "the equipment is failing. We're losing the signal." "Keep it running," President Traoré ordered. "The people need to hear this." Just as the attackers reached the broadcast room, the building shook with a massive explosion. But this time the explosion wasn't targeting them, it was targeting the attackers outside. Through the broken windows they could see military helicopters circling the building. Real military, not the corrupted units that had been compromised. Captain Sanogo's radio crackled with a new voice. "This is General Diarra. We're moving in to secure the building. All hostiles will surrender immediately." The attackers inside the radio station realized they were trapped. Some tried to escape through the back exit, but they found more soldiers waiting for them. "How did the military know where to find us?" President Traoré asked. "Your broadcast, sir," came a voice from the doorway. It was General Diarra himself, followed by a squad of loyal soldiers. "We've been monitoring all frequencies, waiting for word from you." "General, how do we know you're not compromised like the others?" General Diarra smiled grimly. "Because I've been conducting my own investigation into the conspiracy. We've identified most of the traitors, and we're arresting them as we speak." Outside, the sounds of battle were dying down. The attack on the radio station had been the conspirators' last desperate attempt to silence the president, and it had failed. But as President Traoré finally stepped away from the microphone, he realized that the night's events had revealed something important about his country. In the midst of betrayal and corruption, there were still people willing to risk everything for the truth. "Musa," he said to the wounded sergeant, "you chose to protect me instead of killing me. Why?" Musa, his arm in a makeshift sling, managed a weak smile. "Because I realize that some things are more important than money, Mr. President. My daughter will be proud to know that her father fought for what was right. And she'll be proud to know that her father's actions saved not just my life, but our democracy." Captain Sanogo was receiving reports on his radio. "The central bank bombers have been arrested. The Supreme Court attack was staged. Minimal actual damage. Lieutenant Widrago and 2 other officers are in custody. What about the mining company? President Traoré asked General Diarra. We have evidence of their involvement, but they're based overseas. It will take time to bring them to justice. Then we make sure they never get another chance to buy our country. As dawn broke over the capital city, President Traoré prepared to address the nation once more. This time he would speak from the presidential palace, surrounded by security forces he could trust. But the events of the night had changed him. He had seen how close his country had come to falling into chaos, and he was determined to make sure it never happened again. The guard who had tried to assassinate him had instead become his protector, and in that transformation, President Traoré saw hope for his entire nation. By sunrise, the presidential palace was secured, and President Traoré sat in his office, watching as reports came in from across the capital. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed his government was unraveling rapidly. Lieutenant Uberhugo has confessed, General Diarra reported. He provided names of 7 other compromised officers and 3 civilian officials who were working with the mining company. Captain Sanogo, his uniform torn and dirty from the night's battles, studied the list of names. Some of these people have been in government for years. How long has this been planned? According to Ouedraogo, at least 18 months. They started recruiting people slowly, targeting those with financial problems or personal grievances against the government. President Traoré felt a deep sadness as he recognized some of the names. These were people he had trusted, people he had worked with daily. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical attacks. What about the mining company executives? That's more complicated, General Diarra admitted. They operated through shell companies and offshore accounts. Most of the direct contact was handled by intermediaries. Sergeant Musa, his arm in a proper sling now, spoke up from his chair in the corner. The man who contacted me originally called himself the Friend, but I only met him in person twice. He always wore sunglasses and kept his face covered. We'll need you to work with our sketch artist, Captain Sanogo said. Any detail you can remember might help us identify him. There's something else, Musa continued. During our last meeting, he mentioned that this wasn't their first operation. He said they had previous success in other countries with similar tactics. President Traoré exchanged glances with General Diarra. This could be part of a larger pattern. We need to share this information with our neighboring countries. Already in progress, sir. I've contacted the Regional Intelligence Network. As they spoke, more reports continued to arrive. The 3 bombing sites had been secured, and investigators were discovering that the attacks had been designed more for psychological impact than actual destruction. The goal had been to create fear and confusion, not to cause maximum casualties. They wanted chaos, not genocide, Captain Sanogo observed. That suggests they plan to take control afterward, not just destroy everything. Which means they have a plan for what comes next, President Traoré said. Even with their primary operation failed, they might still have backup plans. General Diarra's radio crackled. General, we've arrested the radio station attackers. One of them is asking to make a deal in exchange for information. What kind of information? He claims to know about other operations planned for this week in neighboring countries. President Traoré stood up quickly. Bring him here immediately. If they're planning similar attacks elsewhere, we need to warn our allies. But as they prepared for the interrogation, Captain Sanogo received a disturbing phone call. It was from the hospital, where they had planned to take the president after the staged assassination. Captain, you need to know about something we discovered during the security sweep. We found evidence of a planned takeover of the hospital, not just to harm the president, but to use it as a command center. Command center for what? According to the documents we found, they were planning to declare a medical emergency and impose martial law. The hospital takeover was supposed to happen after the president's death, when the government was in chaos. President Traoré felt chilled by the scope of the conspiracy. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were planning a complete government takeover, and they almost succeeded, General Diarra added grimly. If you hadn't survived the night, if we hadn't maintained communication, they might have pulled it off. Musa shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There's something I didn't tell you before. The people who recruited me, they knew details about government operations that only someone very high up would know. What kind of details? Security protocols, meeting schedules, even some classified policies. They knew more about the government than I did, and I was part of the security detail. Captain Sanogo felt a chill of realization. That means there might be other moles we haven't identified yet. People in positions high enough to access that kind of information. We need to audit everyone with high-level clearance, President Traoré decided, and we need to change all our security protocols immediately. But as they planned their next moves, none of them noticed the small listening device that had been planted in the president's office weeks earlier. A device that was still transmitting their conversation to someone who was already planning the next phase of the operation. The immediate crisis was over, but the war for control of the country was far from finished. And the person listening to their every word was someone they all trusted completely. 3 days after the attack, President Traoré was reviewing security files in his office when General Diarra entered with a grim expression. "Mr. President, we've discovered something troubling about the listening device we found in your office." "What about it?" "It was planted recently, probably within the last week, but it required someone with high-level access to install it without being detected." President Traoré looked up from his papers. The implications were clear. There was still a mole in his inner circle. "Have you narrowed down the suspects?" "To 3 people who had access to your office during the relevant time period." General Diarra handed him a folder. "But there's something else." The interrogation of the captured operatives revealed that their handler is codenamed the Director, someone who has been feeding them information for months. Captain Sanogo entered the office as they spoke. "Sir, we've had a breakthrough. Sergeant Musa worked with our sketch artist, and we have a composite image of the friend." He showed them the sketch, a middle-aged man with distinctive facial features. President Traoré studied it carefully, then froze. "I know this face." "From where, sir?" "He was at the mining company presentation 3 months ago. He introduced himself as a consultant, but I remember thinking something was odd about him." General Diarra pulled out his phone and made a call. "Run a facial recognition search on this image against all recent visitors to government buildings." As they waited for results, Musa arrived for his daily debriefing. His arm was healing well, and he had been helping with the investigation while his family remained in protective custody. "Any word on when my family can come home?" he asked. "Soon," President Traoré assured him. "We're just making sure we've identified all the threats." General Diarra's phone rang. "Yes? Are you certain? Send me the file immediately." He hung up and turned to the others with a shocked expression. The facial recognition got a hit. The friend is David Kuroma, a former intelligence officer who was supposedly killed in a car accident 2 years ago. "But if he's dead," Captain Sanogo began. "He's not dead. He faked his death and has been operating as a freelance operative, and according to his file he's been in the country for 6 months, not 3. President Traoré felt the pieces falling into place. 6 months ago was when the mining contract was first proposed. He's been planning this operation from the beginning. "Sir," General Diarra said quietly, "there's something else. The file shows that Kuroma has been in contact with someone inside the government. Someone who helped him fake his death and has been protecting him ever since." "Who?" Before General Diarra could answer, the office door opened, and Defense Minister Coulibaly entered. "Good afternoon, Mr. President. I heard you were reviewing the security situation." President Traoré looked at the man who had served as his defense minister for 2 years. "Minister Coulibaly, we were just discussing the investigation into the conspiracy." "Excellent. I trust you're making progress in identifying all the traitors." But as Minister Coulibaly spoke, Musa was staring at him intently. Something about the man's voice, his mannerisms, seemed familiar. "Minister," Musa said slowly, "have we met before?" "I don't believe so, Sergeant." "Why do you ask?" "Your voice. It reminds me of someone I spoke with on the phone recently." The room fell silent as everyone processed what Musa was suggesting. Minister Coulibaly's friendly expression didn't change, but his eyes grew cold. "I think you're mistaken, Sergeant." "No," Musa said with growing confidence. "You're the director, aren't you? You're the one who's been coordinating this entire operation." "That's a serious accusation," Minister Coulibaly replied calmly, but his hand was moving slowly toward his jacket pocket. Captain Sanogo saw the movement and drew his weapon. "Minister, please keep your hands visible." "This is ridiculous," Minister Coulibaly protested. I'm a government official, not a terrorist. Then you won't mind if we search you, General Dura said, also drawing his weapon. Minister Cole,